Sometimes the hardest thing in life is doing what's right when nobody's watching and you can barely make ends meet. Roy Benson knew that feeling well at 61. He'd raised his daughter alone after losing his wife, running a small garage that kept food on the table, but not much more. When a struggling veteran walked in with a broken generator and no money to fix it, Roy helped him anyway. His brother laughed at him for it, said kindness doesn't pay bills. But a week later, a flatbed truck pulled up carrying something that left Roy frozen in place, a massive industrial compressor, and a letter revealing who that veteran really was. What arrived that day would change everything, but only if Roy could face a truth from his past he'd been running from for years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun broke across the flatlands of Millbrook just after 6, painting the metal roof of Benson's garage in shades of copper and gold. Roy had already been awake for an hour, sitting at his kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had gone cold while he stared at the bills spread before him. Property taxes, the electric company, a past due notice from the parts supplier that had kept him in business for 20 years. Numbers that didn't add up no matter how many times he rearranged them. He pushed back from the table and carried his mug to the sink, catching his reflection in the window above it. 61 years looked back at him, lines etched deep around eyes that had seen too much loss, silver hair that needed cutting, shoulders still broad but carrying a weight that had nothing to do with muscle. The face of a man who'd learned to measure his life in smaller increments, one day at a time, one repair at a time, one bill at a time. The walk to the garage took 3 minutes across the gravel lot that separated his small house from the work building. He'd made this walk every morning for 30 years, ever since Constance got sick, and he'd abandoned everything else to care for her and their infant daughter. The garage had been his father's before him, a simple pole barn with good bones and enough space to work on farm equipment. Roy had expanded it over the years, added a lift, upgraded the tools when he could afford it. It wasn't much, but it was his. Inside, the familiar smells greeted him: motor oil and metal shavings, the ghost of welding smoke, old coffee from yesterday's pot. He flipped the lights, and fluorescent tubes flickered to life overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of industrial white that made shadows look deeper than they were. His father's old workbench stood against the far wall, scarred and stained from decades of use. Hanging from a nail above it was a faded denim apron, embroidered with the initials C.B. in thread that had once been bright yellow. Constance Benson. She'd worn it the few times she'd helped him in the shop before she got too sick to stand for long. Roy touched the apron briefly. A ritual he performed most mornings without thinking about it, then moved to start the coffee maker he kept on a metal shelf. While it gurgled and hissed, he walked the perimeter of the garage, checking what needed attention. A tractor with a blown hydraulic line, Harlan's old pickup with a transmission that sounded like a box of rocks, the compressor for the Methodist church that wheezed when it shouldn't. Honest work, all of it. Work that kept the community running, even if it barely kept him afloat. The sound of gravel crunching under tires made him turn toward the open bay door. A silver sedan pulled in, new enough to look out of place in his lot. His brother Preston unfolded himself from the driver's seat, dressed in one of those crisp shirts he wore to sell insurance policies to people who couldn't afford them. Preston was 5 years younger, but carried himself like he'd figured out something about life that Roy had missed. "You're here early," Roy said, wiping his hands on a rag, even though they weren't dirty yet. "Wanted to catch you before you got busy." Preston's eyes scanned the garage with the assessing look he always wore in here, like he was calculating depreciation. "You seen the property tax notice?" "I've seen it." "And?" Roy poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one to his brother. "And I'll handle it." "With what money, Roy?" Preston's voice carried that edge of exasperation that had become familiar over the years. You're 2 months behind with the parts supplier. Harlan told me you gave him a discount on that transmission work because his crop came in light. You can't keep doing business like it's 1,985. Harlan's been a good customer for 30 years. Customers pay their bills. Friends are what's putting you in the poorhouse. Preston set his coffee down without drinking it. I've got a buyer interested in this property. Developers want to put in one of those farm supply chains. Good money, Roy. Enough to clear your debts and set you up somewhere easier. I'm not selling. Why not? What are you holding on to? Preston gestured around the garage. This place is killing you inch by inch. You work 12-hour days and can barely keep the lights on. For what? Pride? Roy felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever they had this conversation. This is where I raised Iris. Where Constance is gone, Roy. Preston's voice softened slightly. She's been gone 11 years. You honored her memory. You raised your daughter right. But you're 61 years old, working yourself into the ground for a business that's never going to be more than it is right now. There's no shame in knowing when it's time. Roy turned away, looking out through the bay door at the flat expanse of farmland stretching toward the horizon. His brother wasn't wrong about the facts. The numbers didn't lie. But numbers weren't the whole story. And Preston had never understood that. This garage was more than a business. It was proof that Roy could build something, sustain something, even after the world took away the person who'd made everything make sense. I appreciate the concern, Roy said finally, but I'm not ready to sell. Preston sighed, the sound of a man who'd made his argument and knew it hadn't landed. Your funeral. Just don't say I didn't warn you when the bank starts making noise. After Preston left, Roy stood in the quiet garage and let himself acknowledge what he usually kept buried. His brother was probably right. The smart move, the practical move, would be to sell while he could still get decent money for the property, move into something smaller, maybe even closer to Iris in the city, stop fighting a battle he was slowly losing. But Roy had learned something in the 30 years since he'd walked away from a promising engineering career to care for his dying wife. Sometimes the practical choice and the right choice weren't the same thing. Sometimes you had to hold on to something just because letting go felt like losing the last piece of who you used to be. He finished his coffee, rinsed both mugs in the utility sink, and got to work on Harlan's transmission. His hands knew what to do, even when his mind wandered. That was one advantage of doing the same kind of work for 3 decades. Your body remembered the motions, leaving your thoughts free to drift. He was elbow deep in the transmission casing when he heard another vehicle pull into the lot. This one sounded rougher, an older engine that needed attention. Roy straightened, wiping his hands, and stepped out to see what had arrived. An old pickup truck sat in his lot, primer grey and bearing the particular kind of wear that spoke of hard use rather than neglect. But it was what the truck was towing that caught Roy's attention, a portable generator on a small utility trailer, olive green with faded military markings still visible on its housing. And standing beside it was a man who looked like he'd travelled a long way on not much money. The man was maybe Roy's age, weathered in a way that suggested outdoor living. His clothes were clean but worn, and he moved with a careful deliberation that Roy recognized immediately. Military bearing, ingrained so deep it never quite left. The man's eyes swept the garage once, taking in everything, before settling on Roy with a directness that commanded respect. "Help you with something?" Roy asked. The man gestured to the generator. "Broke down about a mile up the road, pushed it here. Sign says you fix things." "I do." Roy walked over to examine the generator, noting the quality of the equipment beneath the wear. Military grade, designed to run under harsh conditions. "What's it doing?" "Won't start." "Electrical, I think." Had it looked at in Topeka, but Guy couldn't figure it. Roy crouched beside the generator, his trained eye already picking out potential issues. He asked a few questions, listened to the answers, and began to form a picture of the problem. It would take some diagnosis, probably need parts, definitely need time. I can fix it, Roy said. Parts might take a few days to come in. How much? Roy did the math in his head. Parts, labor, time. Probably 300, maybe more if the problem was worse than it looked. He opened his mouth to quote the price, then really looked at the man standing in front of him. Saw the careful way he held himself, saw the truck with temporary plates, saw a life being lived on the margins, just like Roy's own. Let me get into it first, Roy said. See what we're dealing with. You got a phone number where I can reach you? The man hesitated, then shook his head. Staying at the campground out by the lake. No phone. I can check back. Roy nodded slowly, understanding more than was being said. I'll have a better idea by end of day tomorrow. Come by around closing time. Appreciate it. The man extended his hand. Malcolm Greer. Roy Benson. The handshake was firm, brief. You want to leave the generator here? Or, I'll leave it, not going far without it. Malcolm looked at the garage, then back at Roy. You former military? Long time ago? You? Yeah, long time ago. Malcolm gave a slight nod, the kind of acknowledgement that passed between people who'd shared an experience that didn't need explaining. Then he unhitched the trailer, got in his truck, and drove away. Roy stood looking at the generator for a long moment. He already knew fixing it was going to cost more than Malcolm could probably pay. He already knew he was going to fix it anyway. And he already knew exactly what Preston would say about it. But some things mattered more than money. Roy had learned that the hard way, and he wasn't going to forget it now, no matter how tight things got. He pulled the generator into the garage and got to work. Roy spent the better part of 2 days with that generator. What should have been a straightforward diagnosis turned into something more complicated, the kind of problem that required patience and a certain kind of thinking that younger mechanics didn't always have. The issue wasn't just one thing, it was a cascade of small failures that had compounded into a system shutdown. Voltage regulator, corroded connections, a wiring harness that had been repaired too many times with the wrong gauge wire. He ordered the parts on credit from his supplier, wincing at the total but committed now to seeing it through. While he waited for delivery, he cleaned every connection, tested every circuit, mapped out the electrical system until he understood it as well as the engineer who'd designed it. It was good work, the kind that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with mechanical systems in the first place. There was a purity to it, a problem that could be solved with knowledge and skill and patience. Malcolm returned on the third afternoon, walking the mile from the campground. Roy was testing the generator when he arrived, the steady hum of the engine filling the garage bay. You got it running, Malcolm said, and something in his voice suggested he hadn't been entirely sure Roy would. Took some doing, had to replace the voltage regulator, rewire the control panel, rebuild a couple of connections. Roy shut it down, wiped his hands. She'll run reliable now. What do I owe you? Roy had been dreading this moment. He'd tallied the numbers twice, trying to find a way to make them smaller. Parts alone were $220. His labor, if he charged his usual rate, would push it over 400. He looked at Malcolm, really looked at him, the worn boots, the careful way he rationed his movements like a man conserving energy, the quiet dignity that came from holding yourself together when everything was falling apart. Parts were 200, Roy said. Call it 250 with labor. Malcolm's face didn't change, but Roy saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. Saw the man measuring what he had against what he owed, coming up short. That's fair, more than fair. Problem is, I've got about $60 until my pension check clears next week. Roy had known it would be something like this. He'd known it when he ordered the parts, known it when he spent 6 hours rewiring the control panel. Some part of him had maybe even known it when Malcolm first pulled into his lot. Tell you what, Roy said, you pay me the 60 now. Send me the rest when you can. No hurry. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Roy met Malcolm's eyes. Man needs his equipment working. You can settle up when your situation improves. Malcolm stood very still for a long moment. Then he reached for his wallet, counted out 3 20s, and placed them on the workbench. I don't forget debts. Didn't figure you did. They loaded the generator onto the trailer in comfortable silence, two men who understood that some transactions went beyond money. Malcolm hitched up the trailer, tested the connections, then turned back to Roy. You know your way around electrical systems, he said. Not many guys would have caught what you caught. Where'd you learn? Here and there. Used to do engineering work, long time ago. Malcolm nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he'd suspected. Thought I recognized the hands of someone who'd done more than turn wrenches. You ever think about getting back into it? Roy felt something shift in his chest, an old door opening that he'd thought he'd locked permanently. That was another life. This one suits me fine. If you say so. Malcolm extended his hand again. Appreciate what you did here. Roy watched Malcolm drive away, generator humming steadily behind him, and felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and concern that came from doing the right thing at the wrong time financially. He was $60 richer and $200 poorer than when the week started. Preston would have a field day with this one. He didn't have to wait long. Preston's sedan pulled in 20 minutes later, and Roy knew from the way his brother got out of the car that someone had been talking. Small towns were like that. News travelled at the speed of gossip, and Charity always made for good conversation. Dottie called me, Preston said without preamble. Said she saw some drifter leaving your place with a generator you fixed. Said he paid you in pocket change. He paid what he could. He'll pay the rest later. Roy, for the love of... Preston stopped, pressed his fingers against his temples like he was fighting off a headache. Do you know how businesses fail? They fail exactly like this. One good deed at a time, one unpaid bill at a time, until there's nothing left but good intentions and bankruptcy notices. Malcolm will pay. Malcolm? You're on a first-name basis now? Preston's voice rose. You don't even know this guy. He could be anyone. Could be a con artist who targets soft-hearted mechanics in small towns. He's a veteran, so... That doesn't make him honest. That doesn't make him good for the money. Preston paced the garage floor, his dress shoes clicking on the concrete. You think Iris is going to be impressed when she comes home and finds out you lost this place because you couldn't say no to every sob story that rolled through? The mention of his daughter touched something raw in Roy. Don't bring Iris into this. Someone has to think about her future. You certainly aren't. Preston stopped pacing, faced Roy directly. This garage is her inheritance. It's all she's going to have of her mother, of you, of this life you've built. And you're pissing it away, one charitable act at a time. I'm teaching her that some things matter more than money. You're teaching her that her father is a fool. Preston's voice went cold. You want to know what I think? I think you like struggling. I think you wear it like a badge of honor. St. Roy, too pure for profit, too good for success. Meanwhile, the rest of us have to watch you drown in your own nobility. Roy felt anger flare, hot and sudden. Get out. I'm trying to help you. I said get out. Roy's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath. You want to criticize my choices, you can do it somewhere else. Preston stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. You can't feed a family on good intentions, Roy. Sooner or later, reality is going to come for you. And when it does, don't expect me to bail you out. He left, tires spitting gravel as he accelerated too fast out of the lot. Roy stood in the empty garage, hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of confrontation. He hated fighting with Preston. They were the only family each other had, besides Iris. But his brother's words had found their mark, because somewhere deep down, Roy worried they might be true. What if he was being foolish? What if all these small acts of kindness were just a slower way of losing everything? What if Preston was right, that you couldn't build a life on doing the right thing? Roy walked to the workbench, picked up the $60 Malcolm had left. 320s, worn soft from use, probably representing a significant portion of what the man had to his name. He folded them carefully and slipped them into his wallet, then stood looking at the empty space where the generator had been. The truth was, he didn't know if Malcolm would pay the rest, didn't know if he'd ever see that money again, didn't know if he was being wise or foolish, or somewhere in between. All he knew was that when he'd looked at Malcolm Greer, he'd seen a man who needed help, and Roy had spent too many years learning to ignore his own needs to start ignoring someone else's. He locked up the garage as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow he'd deal with the parts supplier, try to negotiate another extension. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to make the numbers work. But tonight he'd done something right, and he was going to let that be enough. The week passed in the usual rhythm of work. Harlan picked up his truck, paid cash, and slipped Roy an extra 20. He tried to refuse, but ended up pocketing because pride had limits. The Methodist Church's compressor went back into service. New jobs came in, old jobs got finished, and the garage kept running on the momentum of routine. Roy didn't hear from Malcolm. Didn't expect to, really. The man was probably long gone by now, generator humming along wherever the road took him. That was fine. Roy hadn't done it for gratitude or repayment. He'd done it because it needed doing. Then, exactly 1 week after Malcolm had driven away, Roy heard the distinctive sound of a heavy vehicle pulling into his lot. He stepped out of the garage, shielding his eyes against the morning sun, and stopped dead. A flatbed truck sat in his driveway, carrying something massive covered with a tarp. The driver climbed down, clipboard in hand, looking at Roy like he was checking off a delivery route. "You, Roy Benson." "I am. Got a delivery for you. Where do you want it?" Roy walked closer, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "I didn't order anything. According to my paperwork, it's paid for." "Delivery address confirmed." The driver pulled back a corner of the tarp, revealing industrial-grade metal, professional welds, the unmistakable bulk of serious equipment. "Industrial welder compressor rig. You want it or not?" Roy's mind reeled. The equipment under that tarp was worth more than his truck, more than most of what he owned. There must be a mistake. No mistake. "Got a letter here too. Says to hand it to you personally." The driver produced a cream-colored envelope from his clipboard, extended it toward Roy. Roy took the envelope with hands that weren't quite steady. His name was written across the front in precise, careful handwriting. The kind of penmanship that belonged to another generation, when people took time with such things. "So where do you want it?" the driver asked again. Roy looked at the massive piece of equipment, at the envelope in his hands, at his small garage that suddenly felt like it was standing on the edge of something much larger than a simple delivery. "Inside," he said quietly. "Bring it inside." The compressor dominated the center of Roy's garage, like a monument to possibilities he'd stopped imagining years ago. It took the delivery driver and Roy nearly an hour to position it properly, the machine's weight requiring careful maneuvering even with the hydraulic lift on the flatbed. When the truck finally pulled away, Roy stood alone with this massive piece of equipment and the envelope he'd been too nervous to open. He made coffee first, a delaying tactic he recognized but indulged anyway. The envelope sat on his workbench, patient and ominous, while he went through the motions of grinding beans and waiting for water to heat. When he finally picked it up again, he noticed his hands were steadier than they'd been an hour ago. That was good. Whatever was inside deserved to be read with a clear head. The letter was written on quality paper, the kind that had weight to it. Roy unfolded it carefully and began to read. "Dear Roy," it started. "By now, you've probably realized that I'm not just a drifter passing through with a broken generator. My name is Malcolm Greer, and until 6 months ago, I was senior mechanical engineer at Hartfield Industrial. The company makes precision equipment for manufacturing plants across the Midwest. I spent 38 years there, the last 15 in their engineering division. Roy lowered the letter, processing this information. Malcolm had seemed competent, educated even, but Roy had assumed he'd fallen on hard times. This changed things. He kept reading. When you fixed my generator, I watched how you worked, watched you diagnose a problem that had stumped a younger mechanic with better equipment. You identified the issue within minutes, then improvised a solution using materials you had on hand. It was masterful work, Roy. The kind that comes from deep understanding, not just technical training. A flush of pride warmed Roy's chest, followed immediately by suspicion. Where was this going? I did some research after I left your garage. Found out you graduated top of your engineering class at State, served in the military's specialized engineering corps, then had a job offer from Kessler Defense Systems, waiting when you got out. That's a trajectory that should have led somewhere significant. But then your wife got sick, and you came home to take care of her and your daughter. You never went back. Roy set the letter down, his throat tight. These were facts, yes, but seeing them laid out like this made them feel less like choices and more like losses. He took a breath, picked the letter back up. I recognized something in you, Roy. I saw a man working far beneath his capabilities because life demanded sacrifice. I saw the hands of a master mechanic who should be training the next generation, not just keeping tractors running. I saw myself 30 years ago if I'd made different choices. The letter's tone shifted here, became more direct. The compressor is a gift, but it's also an investment. I know you're struggling financially, small towns talk, and I asked around before I left. That equipment is worth about $30,000. You can keep it, sell it, use it however you need, but I'm hoping you'll consider another option. Roy's pulse quickened. Hartfield Industrial is opening a regional training facility in Cedar Rapids, about 90 miles from Millbrook. We need experienced instructors for advanced welding and fabrication. The position pays $60,000 a year, includes benefits, and would only require you 3 days a week on site. You could keep your garage running on the other days. The compressor would be yours to use for training purposes. Roy read that paragraph 3 times, making sure he understood it correctly. $60,000 a year, benefits, 3 days a week. It seemed impossible, too good to be real. I've recommended you for the position, the letter continued, but they'll need to see a portfolio of your work and conduct a formal interview. I know this is sudden, and I know you have reasons to be skeptical. But Roy, some debts are paid forward. You helped me when I had nothing. Now I'm trying to return the favor. The question is whether you're brave enough to let me. The letter ended with contact information for someone named Judith Oakes, VP of Training and Development at Hartfield Industrial, and Malcolm's personal phone number. There was a handwritten postscript at the bottom. Judith remembers you from the old days. She specifically asked me to make sure you received this opportunity. Roy's vision blurred slightly. He set the letter down and pressed his palms against the workbench, steadying himself. Judith Oakes. He hadn't heard that name in over 30 years, but hearing it now brought back a flood of memories he'd carefully stored away. They'd worked together in the engineering corps, before Constance, before everything changed. Judith had been brilliant, driven, heading for bigger things even then. The fact that she remembered him, that she wanted to give him this chance, felt both humbling and terrifying. The sound of tires on gravel made him look up. Iris's car, a sensible sedan she'd bought used 3 years ago, pulled into the lot. She got out, and Roy felt the familiar surge of love and pride he always felt seeing his daughter. 28 years old now, a teacher at an elementary school 2 hours away in the city. She had Constance's dark hair and quick smile, but her eyes were Roy's observant, thoughtful, seeing more than they let on. "Hey, Dad." She hugged him, then stepped back and looked at the massive compressor dominating the garage. "What on earth is that?" "It's a long story. I've got time. Took a personal day. Figured we could make dinner together tonight, use Mum's recipes." She held up a grocery bag. "Got everything for her pot roast." Roy felt emotion catch in his throat. Cooking together had become their ritual, a way of keeping Constance present in their lives. They used her old recipe box, written in her careful handwriting, and it made the house feel less empty for a few hours. "I'd like that," he said. "But first, I need to show you something." He handed her the letter, watched her face as she read, saw surprise shift to excitement, then to concern. When she finished, she looked up at him with those eyes that could always read him too well. "Dad, this is incredible. This could change everything." "Could," Roy agreed. "Or it could be a mistake. I'm 61, Iris. I haven't done real engineering work in 3 decades. What if I interview, and they realize I'm not who they think I am? What if you are exactly who they think you are, and you've just forgotten?" Iris set the letter down carefully. "This Judith person, who is she?" "Someone I worked with a long time ago, before I met your mother." Roy paused, choosing his words carefully. "We were in the engineering corps together. She was headed for big things. I guess she got there." Iris studied him with that teacher's instinct for sensing what wasn't being said. "Were you too close?" "We were colleagues. Friends, maybe. It was a long time ago, before I knew what I wanted from life." Roy touched the letter gently. "Your mother was what I wanted. You were what I wanted. I don't regret the choices I made. But you wonder sometimes what the other path would have looked like." It wasn't a question. Roy nodded slowly. "Sometimes, late at night, when the bills are piled up and the garage feels more like a burden than a blessing. But wondering and doing are different things." "So do it," Iris said simply. "Go to the interview. See what happens. What's the worst that could occur? They say no. You're already telling yourself no. At least let them make the decision." Roy wanted to explain all the reasons this was complicated. Wanted to talk about Preston's reaction, about the garage, about feeling too old and too tired to start something new. But looking at his daughter, seeing her belief in him reflected in her face, he found those objections felt smaller than they had before. "There's something else," Iris said quietly. "Something I need to talk to you about, and this seems like the right time." She twisted the ring on her right hand, a nervous gesture Roy recognized from her childhood. "Greg proposed 2 weeks ago. I haven't given him an answer yet." Roy's heart did something complicated, joy and fear, and a profound sense of time's relentless movement. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Greg's a good man. He is. He's patient and kind, and he makes me laugh. And I'm terrified." Iris's eyes filled with tears. "What if I say yes and something happens? What if I lose him the way you lost, Mom? What if I'm not strong enough to handle that kind of pain?" Roy pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her the way he'd held her when she was small and the world felt too big. "You're strong enough. You come from strong stock. But more than that, love is worth the risk. Your mother taught me that." "I keep thinking," Iris said against his shoulder, "what if I'm using worry about you as an excuse? What if I'm staying stuck because it feels safer than moving forward?" Roy pulled back to look at her. "Is that what you think you're doing? Maybe. And maybe you're doing the same thing. Maybe we're both so scared of losing what we have that we're forgetting to build what we could have." The truth of it hit Roy like cold water. She was right. They'd both been treading water, staying afloat, but not swimming toward anything. Constance had been gone 11 years, and in all that time, neither of them had really moved forward. They just kept existing in the space her absence had created. "So, what do we do?" Roy asked. "We both say yes. You to the interview, me to Greg." Iris smiled through her tears. "We take the risk together." Roy looked at the letter on his workbench, at the massive compressor, at his daughter's hopeful face. Felt something shift inside him, like a door that had been locked for years finally opening. "Deal," he said. They cooked dinner together that evening, following Constance's recipe for pot roast with carrots and potatoes. The kitchen filled with familiar smells, and for a few hours The house felt like it used to, full of warmth and conversation and the particular comfort that comes from shared history. When they sat down to eat, Iris raised her glass of water. "To Mom," she said, "for teaching us that love is worth the risk." "To your mother," Roy agreed. "And to new beginnings." They clinked glasses, and Roy felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the desperate, grasping kind, but the quiet variety that comes from deciding to trust that tomorrow might be different than today. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Roy called the number Malcolm had provided the next morning, half expecting it to ring unanswered or lead to some kind of misunderstanding. Instead, a professional voice answered after 2 rings. "Hartfield Industrial Training Division, this is Judith Oakes." Hearing her voice after 3 decades sent Roy back in time for a moment. It was older, more assured, but still carried that particular clarity he remembered. "Judith, this is Roy Benson. Malcolm Greer gave me your contact information." There was a pause, then warmth flooded her voice. "Roy, Malcolm said he'd reached out to you. I'm glad you called. I'm not sure I understand what's happening here. Malcolm thinks very highly of your abilities, and frankly, so do I. We worked together long enough for me to know what you were capable of. The question is whether you still believe it yourself." Roy gripped the phone tighter. "It's been a long time, Judith. I'm not the same person you knew. None of us are. But talent doesn't disappear, Roy. It just gets buried under other priorities. I'm offering you a chance to dig it back up." She paused. "We need someone who can bridge the gap between old-school craftsmanship and modern techniques. Someone who understands the fundamentals deeply enough to teach them properly. Your name came up, and I advocated for you. Why? We haven't spoken in 30 years. Because I remember watching you solve a bearing failure problem in 15 minutes that had stumped a team of engineers for 3 days. Because I remember you teaching an entire squad how to field repair equipment using nothing but basic tools and physics. You had a gift, Roy. I doubt it went anywhere." Roy felt something crack open in his chest, some sealed place where he'd locked away his former ambitions. "What would I need to do?" "Put together a portfolio of your recent work. Come in for an interview. Show us you're still the engineer I remember." Judith's voice softened. "I know this is asking a lot, but I wouldn't waste your time if I didn't think you could do this." They talked logistics, timeline, expectations, interview format. When Roy finally hung up, he felt simultaneously energized and terrified. He had 3 weeks to prepare a portfolio that would convince a panel of professionals he was worth hiring. The problem was, most of his recent work consisted of fixing tractors and welding broken farm equipment. Not exactly the sophisticated projects that demonstrated advanced engineering principles. He spent that evening in his small house, surrounded by old textbooks he'd kept in boxes in the spare bedroom. Engineering mechanics, materials science, advanced welding techniques. Opening them felt like visiting old friends who'd aged while he wasn't looking. The information was still relevant, but the context had changed. New materials, new methods, new technologies he'd only read about in passing. Roy made notes, sketched ideas, tried to remember the engineer he'd been before life demanded he become something else. It was slow work, frustrating work, but also strangely satisfying. His mind engaged with problems in ways it hadn't in years. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear the knock at first. When it came again, louder, he glanced at the clock. Nearly 10 at night. He opened the door to find Preston standing on his porch, clearly agitated. "You didn't tell me," Preston said without preamble. "Tell you what?" "About the compressor. About whatever's going on." Preston pushed past Roy into the house, saw the textbook spread across the dining table. "What is all this?" Roy closed the door, resigned to the conversation he'd been avoiding. "I've been offered a job opportunity. Teaching position at an industrial training facility." Preston stared at him. "You're joking." "I'm not. Roy, you're 61 years old. You fix tractors. What makes you think you can suddenly become a teacher? I used to be an engineer. A good one, apparently. Someone remembered that. Preston picked up one of the textbooks, flipped through it like he was looking for evidence of delusion. This is insane. You're going to embarrass yourself. They're going to take one look at you and realize you're 30 years out of date. Maybe, but I'm going to try anyway. Why? Preston's frustration boiled over. You have a perfectly functional life here. Why risk it chasing some fantasy about who you used to be? Roy felt anger rising. Because I'm tired of just surviving, Preston. I'm tired of choosing between which bill to pay and which to ignore. I'm tired of watching you look at me like I'm some kind of failure because I never cared about money the way you do. I don't think you're a failure. I think you're stubborn and prideful and you refuse to see reality. Preston set the book down hard enough to make a noise. You want to know the truth? I've been talking to developers about this property. They're ready to make an offer. Good money, enough to clear your debts and set you up somewhere comfortable. I told you I'm not selling. You don't have a choice anymore. Roy, I need that commission. Preston's voice cracked slightly. I've made some bad investments. My business is struggling. I'm facing bankruptcy if I don't close this deal. The admission hung in the air between them. Roy had suspected Preston was having financial troubles, but hearing it confirmed changed things. This wasn't just about concern for Roy, it was about Preston's own desperation. So this is about you, Roy said quietly. Not about what's best for me or for this property, about what you need. It can be about both. You sell, I get my commission. We both solve our problems. Except my problem isn't the property. My problem is that I've been standing still for 11 years, and I'm finally ready to move forward. Your solution would just keep me stuck. Preston's face flushed. Moving forward? You're chasing a pipe dream. You'll go to this interview, they'll realize you're not qualified, and you'll come back here with nothing except wounded pride. And I'll still be drowning in debt because you're too stubborn to accept help. It's not help if it only benefits you. Everything doesn't have to be a noble sacrifice, Roy. Sometimes the smart thing and the right thing are the same thing. But you've never been able to see that because you're so busy being the good guy that you can't recognize when you're just being stupid. Roy pointed to the door. Get out. I'm trying to save you from yourself. I said get out. Preston stood there for a long moment, jaw working like he was trying to find the right words to make Roy understand. Finally, he shook his head. When this falls apart, don't come crying to me. I'm done trying to help someone who doesn't want to be helped. After Preston left, Roy sat at his table surrounded by engineering textbooks and felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. Maybe his brother was right. Maybe this was foolish. Maybe he was setting himself up for embarrassment and failure. But then he thought about Iris, about their pact to both say yes to new possibilities. He thought about Constance, who'd always encouraged him to use his talents. He thought about the look on Malcolm's face when Roy had fixed that generator respect, recognition, the acknowledgement of skill that went beyond simple mechanical work. Roy pulled a dusty portfolio case from the back of his closet, black leather, worn at the corners, containing projects and drawings from another lifetime. He opened it carefully, like unsealing a time capsule. Inside were blueprints he'd drafted by hand, photographs of equipment he'd designed and built, commendations from his military service, evidence of the engineer he'd been. The work looked old-fashioned now, rendered in pencil and ink rather than computer software. But the principles were sound, the designs elegant, the problem-solving sophisticated. Roy studied each piece, remembering the thinking behind it, the challenges he'd overcome. This was proof that he'd once been capable of more than fixing tractors. The question was whether he still was. Over the next week, Roy divided his time between running the garage and preparing his portfolio. He photographed recent projects that demonstrated advanced skills, a custom fabrication for the grain elevator, a complex hydraulic repair on the fire department's truck, a precision welding job that had saved the hardware store's loading dock. Nothing glamorous, but all showing mastery of fundamental engineering principles. Evenings, he updated his old work with notes, explaining the underlying concepts and how they'd apply to modern applications. He researched current industry standards, studied new materials and techniques, tried to bridge the gap between what he knew and what he'd need to demonstrate. It was exhausting. His eyes strained from reading small print by inadequate light. His back ached from hunching over the dining table. But there was also something deeply satisfying about engaging his mind this way again, about remembering he was more than just a small-town mechanic. Finn, his young apprentice, he noticed the change. "You seem different lately," he said one afternoon while they were replacing a transmission. "More focused or something. Just got some things on my mind." "Good things or bad things?" Roy considered the question. "Uncertain things, which I suppose is better than nothing. My uncle says uncertainty means possibility, says if you already know what's going to happen, you're not really living." Roy smiled at the wisdom coming from someone half his age. "Your uncle sounds smart." "He is. He's a state inspector. Actually wanted me to tell you something." Finn pulled a card from his pocket. "Said if you ever need documentation on your garage for any reason, he can help make sure everything's up to code. Said there's been some weird complaints filed recently, but they looked suspicious to him." Roy took the card, feeling ice in his stomach. "Anonymous ones, about safety violations and stuff. But my uncle says the photos looked staged, like someone was trying to make problems where there weren't any." Finn shrugged. "Figured you should know." After Finn left, Roy sat in his garage and felt the pieces click into place. Preston wasn't just pushing him to sell through words, he was trying to manufacture a crisis that would force Roy's hand. The realization hurt less than he expected, maybe, because on some level he'd known his brother was desperate enough to try something like this. Roy called Finn's uncle and arranged to have a proper inspection done, one that would document the actual condition of the property. If Preston had filed false reports, Roy wanted evidence to counter them. He wouldn't let sabotage derail this opportunity. That night, alone in his house with textbooks and portfolio materials spread around him, Roy made a decision. He would attend the interview regardless of what Preston did, regardless of whether he succeeded or failed. He would try because trying was better than wondering. He would risk embarrassment because dignity without growth was just another kind of stagnation. He pulled out his phone and called Iris. "I'm scared," he admitted when she answered. "Me too," she said. "I told Greg, yes, this afternoon. We're getting married in 6 months." Roy felt tears prick his eyes. "Your mother would be so happy. I think she'd be happy for both of us, taking risks, moving forward. That's what she'd want." Iris paused. "You're still going to the interview, right?" "I am. Even if Preston tries to stop me, even if I fail." "You won't fail, Dad, but even if you do, at least you'll know, and knowing is worth more than safety." After they hung up, Roy sat in the quiet house and felt something shift inside him. Fear didn't disappear, but it felt less paralyzing. He was going to try. Whatever happened next, at least he would know he'd been brave enough to reach for something beyond survival. 2 weeks before the interview, Roy received an official notice from the county inspector's office. Routine inspection scheduled for the following Monday, required by county ordinance for commercial properties. Nothing unusual about it, except for the timing. Roy stood in his garage reading the notice and felt the trap closing around him. Preston had filed his complaints under the guise of concerned citizen reports, and now the county was obligated to investigate. Even if Roy's garage was perfectly fine, the appearance of violations during an active inspection could derail everything with Hartfield. He called Finn's uncle immediately. "I can be there when the inspector comes," the man said. His name was Harold Shepherd, and he had the calm, methodical voice of someone who'd spent decades separating truth from exaggeration. Can't interfere with the official inspection, but I can observe and document everything. If there's anything fishy, I'll know. Monday arrived grey and cold, one of those late autumn days that promised winter wasn't far behind. The county inspector showed up at 9 sharp, a thin man named Carlyle, who carried his clipboard like a weapon. Roy recognized the type immediately, someone who'd learned that finding problems justified his existence. "Mr. Benson," Carlyle said without warmth, "I'll need full access to the property, workshop, storage areas, electrical panels, everything." "Of course," Roy gestured to the garage. "Anything you need to see." Harold arrived 20 minutes later, parking discreetly and observing from a distance. Roy watched Carlyle work, saw him taking photographs, making notes, occasionally shaking his head in that particular way that meant he was building a case. After 2 hours, Carlyle emerged with a list. "Multiple violations," he said, reading from his clipboard. "Electrical panel not up to current code. Ventilation system inadequate for welding operations. Storage of flammable materials doesn't meet safety standards. Structural concerns with the roof support." Roy's jaw tightened. "That electrical panel was inspected 3 years ago and passed. The ventilation has been fine for 30 years. What structural concerns?" Carlyle showed him photographs that made Roy's blood run cold. They showed his garage, but details had been manipulated or staged, equipment moved to create apparent violations, angles chosen to make safe practices look dangerous, normal wear and tear presented as critical failures. "These photos," Roy said carefully, "when were they taken?" "Submitted with the initial complaint 2 weeks ago." "By whom?" "Anonymous reporting is allowed under county regulations." Harold stepped forward then, introducing himself and showing his state credentials. "Mind if I take a look at those photos?" Carlyle hesitated but handed over his clipboard. Harold studied each image, his expression neutral, then walked through the garage, comparing the photographs to reality. Roy watched him note discrepancies, take his own pictures, make detailed observations in a small notebook. "Interesting," Harold said finally. "Several of these photos show equipment positioned in ways that violate safety protocols, but the equipment is currently positioned correctly, which suggests either Mr. Benson moved everything between when these photos were taken and today, or someone staged these images specifically to create the appearance of violations." Carlyle's face flushed. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm observing facts." Harold's voice remained mild. "The electrical panel in these photos has a cover plate that's been removed. Current cover plate shows no signs of recent removal. Paint is intact around the screws. No fresh marks. The flammable materials shown stored improperly in this photo are currently stored correctly, and the storage area shows no evidence of recent reorganization. Could have been cleaned up when he knew inspection was coming." "Could have," Harold agreed. "Except that would require moving several £100 of equipment, repainting sections of wall, and aging new paint to match old, all in the 2 weeks since these photos were supposedly taken. Possible, but unlikely." Roy felt something like hope stirring. Harold was methodically dismantling the fabricated case against him. Carlyle spent another hour re-inspecting everything, this time with Harold observing every step. In the end, he found 3 legitimate minor issues: a fire extinguisher slightly past its inspection date, some paperwork that needed updating, and a section of floor that could use repair. Nothing that would shut down the garage. Nothing that couldn't be corrected in a few days. "I'll file my report," Carlyle said stiffly. "You have 30 days to address the minor issues I've noted. The major violations shown in the complaint photos cannot be substantiated based on current conditions." After both inspectors left, Roy sat on his workbench and felt relief wash over him. But the relief was temporary. Preston had tried to sabotage him and failed, but that didn't mean he wouldn't try again. The confrontation came that evening. Roy was closing up the garage when Preston's car pulled in fast enough to spray gravel. His brother got out, face dark with anger. "You had that state inspector there," Preston said. "You deliberately undermined the inspection. I documented the truth. There's a difference. You're making this so much harder than it needs to be." Preston's voice rose. "All you have to do is sign." "I'm not signing anything." "You don't have a choice. I've already—" Preston stopped abruptly, but Roy saw the truth in his brother's eyes. "You've already what?" Roy's voice went cold. "What did you do, Preston?" Preston's shoulders sagged. "I may have signed some preliminary documents, nothing binding, just expressions of interest." "Using my name?" "Using our family name. The property is part of Dad's estate that we both inherited. I have as much right. The property is mine. Dad left it to me in the will. You know that." Roy felt fury building. "Tell me you didn't forge my signature." Preston's silence was answer enough. Roy stepped forward, and for a moment he genuinely wanted to hit his brother, wanted to drive his fist into that face that looked so much like their father's and make Preston feel a fraction of the betrayal Roy was feeling. But he stopped himself, hands shaking with the effort of restraint. "You committed fraud," Roy said quietly. "You forged legal documents. That's a crime, Preston. I was trying to save both of us. You're going to lose this place anyway when you can't make the tax payment. I'm going to lose everything I've built because of gambling debts I can't pay. This was supposed to fix everything." Preston's voice cracked. "I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. You chose the easy way, the dishonest way." "Easy?" Preston laughed bitterly. "You think any of this has been easy? Watching you be the good son, the noble one, the one everyone respects, while I'm just the insurance salesman nobody trusts? Watching you throw away opportunities I would have killed for? You have no idea what it's like living in your shadow. So you decided to drag me down to make yourself feel better. I decided to save us both, even if you're too stubborn to see you need saving." Preston pulled a folder from his car. "The buyers are expecting an answer by Friday. If you don't sign, I'm going to lose everything. My business, my house, possibly my freedom, if the people I owe money to get impatient." Roy took the folder, looked at the documents inside. Sale agreement, preliminary title work, all bearing forged signatures that looked remarkably like his own. Preston had been thorough in his deception. "I could have you arrested," Roy said. "You could. You'd be justified. Which means you'll find some way to save me, even though I don't deserve it." The worst part was that Preston was probably right. Roy looked at his brother desperate, ashamed, broken by his own poor choices, and felt anger warring with obligation. This was family. This was the brother he'd grown up with, who'd stood beside him at their father's funeral, who'd helped Roy through the darkest days after Constance died. But this was also the man who'd just tried to steal his property and destroy his chance at a new beginning. "Here's what's going to happen," Roy said slowly. "You're going to withdraw those documents. You're going to tell the buyers the deal is off, and you're going to get help for your gambling problem." "I can't. The people I owe won't wait." "Then you tell them they have to wait. You face the consequences of your choices like an adult, instead of trying to solve your problems by creating mine." Roy's voice hardened. "And if you ever forge my signature again, if you ever try to manipulate me or my property again, I will press charges, brother or not." Preston stared at him for a long moment. "What about my debts? After the interview, if I get the job, I'll help you. Not by selling my property, but by helping you find a way out that doesn't involve theft and fraud. But Preston, you have to want help. You have to be willing to do the hard work of fixing your life. And if you don't get the job, then we'll figure something else out. But it won't involve sacrificing what I've built." Preston took the folder back slowly. "You're really going through with this interview thing?" "I am. You're going to fail. You know that, right? They're going to take one look at you and see exactly what I see, a 61-year-old mechanic who's 30 years out of date. Preston's voice wasn't cruel now, just tired. "And when you do fail, when you come back here with nothing, I won't be around to help pick up the pieces. Then I'll pick them up myself. I've had practice." After Preston left, Roy stood in the empty garage and felt the full weight of what had just happened. His brother had betrayed him, committed fraud, and threatened everything Roy was trying to build. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to press charges and protect himself legally. But Preston was right about one thing: Roy couldn't do it, couldn't destroy his brother, even when his brother had tried to destroy him. It wasn't about being noble. It was about being unable to live with himself if he didn't at least try to help family, even family that didn't deserve it. He locked up the garage and walked back to his house under a sky heavy with clouds. The interview was in 10 days. 10 days to finish his portfolio, prepare his presentation, and somehow convince a panel of professionals that he was worth taking a chance on. 10 days to prove Preston wrong. Or 10 days until Preston was proven right. Roy didn't know which possibility scared him more. The days before the interview blurred together in a haze of preparation and doubt. Roy worked on his portfolio late into each night, refining presentations, practicing explanations of his work, trying to anticipate questions a panel might ask. His dining table became a war room covered in papers, photographs, technical drawings that spanned 3 decades of work. He was studying a blueprint from his military days when he noticed the small silver locket sitting in the corner of his desk drawer. Constance's locket, the one he'd given her on their 5th anniversary. Inside were 2 photos, one of Constance at 25, smiling in the sunlight, and one of baby Iris sleeping in her crib. Roy held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of memory and loss. "I'm scared," he said aloud to the empty room, to Constance's memory. "I'm scared I'm going to fail and prove Preston right. I'm scared I wasted the life you should have had by staying small." The locket offered no answers, but holding it steadied him somehow. Constance had never asked him to be anything other than himself. She'd supported his decision to leave engineering, had told him repeatedly that loving her and raising Iris was enough. The guilt about wasted potential was his alone, not hers. He placed the locket carefully back in the drawer and returned to his work. 3 days before the interview, Dottie from the diner appeared at his garage with a covered dish and a concerned expression. "Heard you've been working yourself ragged," she said, setting the food on his workbench. "Chicken and dumplings. You need to eat something besides coffee and stress." News travels fast in Millbrook. Small towns are like that. Everyone knows everyone's business. Dottie sat on a stool, studying him with eyes that had watched Millbrook's residents for 40 years. "Also heard Preston's been drinking more than usual down at the diner. Talking about how you're making a mistake." Roy felt a flash of anger. Preston needs to worry about his own choices. "He's scared, Roy. Scared for you, scared for himself. Fear makes people say ugly things." Dottie paused. "But between you and me, I think what you're doing is brave. Most people your age, our age, we settle into what we know. You're reaching for something more. That takes courage. Or foolishness. Sometimes they're the same thing." She smiled. "Eat the dumplings. And Roy, whatever happens at that interview, you're still the same good man who fixed Malcolm's generator for nothing. Success or failure doesn't change that." After she left, Roy sat alone with the chicken and dumplings and felt grateful for small-town kindness. Dottie was right, he was still himself, regardless of outcomes. But he wanted to be more, wanted to prove he could still contribute something beyond basic repairs. The phone rang late that afternoon. Judith Oakes, calling from Hartfield. "Just checking in," she said, "making sure you're still planning to come Friday." "I'll be there." "Good. I wanted to give you a heads up about the interview panel. There will be 3 of us: myself, our operations director, and the head of the fabrication department, Quentin Vale. Quentin can be challenging. He's not convinced we need someone with your background. He thinks we should hire younger instructors." Roy's stomach tightened. So I'm walking into a hostile audience. Not hostile, skeptical, which means you'll need to be better than good, Roy. You'll need to show them something they're not expecting. Judith's voice softened. I believe you can do this, but belief isn't enough. You have to prove it to them and to yourself. After hanging up, Roy stood in his garage and felt the full weight of what he was attempting. He wasn't just interviewing for a job. He was trying to reclaim a part of himself he'd buried 30 years ago. And if he failed, it wouldn't just be professional embarrassment, it would be confirmation that he'd made the wrong choice all those years ago, that he could have been more but settled for less. That night, Iris called. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified." "Good. That means it matters." She paused. "I've been thinking about Mum a lot lately. About how she always encouraged you to use your talents, how she never wanted you to feel stuck." "I never felt stuck with her." "I know. But maybe you felt stuck after. Maybe we both did." Iris's voice grew thoughtful. "I've been going through her recipe box, looking for dishes for the wedding reception. Found a note she wrote on the back of her pot roast card. Want to hear it?" "Yes." It says, "Roy's favorite. Make this when he needs reminding that good things take time and care." Iris's voice caught. "She knew you, Dad. Knew you'd need patience with yourself." Roy felt his throat tighten. "I miss her." "Me too. But I think she'd want us moving forward, not staying frozen in missing her." Iris took a breath. "Greg and I set a date. March 15th, spring wedding. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. And Dad, I want you to give a toast. Want you to talk about love and courage and second chances. I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about any of that. You're the most qualified person I know. You loved Mum through the hardest thing imaginable. You raised me alone. And now you're brave enough to try something new even when you're scared. If that's not courage, I don't know what is." After they hung up, Roy sat with Constance's recipe box, reading through her handwritten cards. Each one was more than instructions. They were small pieces of her personality, comments and adjustments, and little notes to herself. "Roy likes extra pepper. Iris won't eat onions, leave them out. Make this on hard days." She'd been documenting love, he realized, teaching him how to care for their daughter even after she was gone. The recipes weren't just about food, they were about presence, attention, the small acts that built a life together. Roy found the pot roast card, read her note about patience and care. Then he closed the box and made a decision. Whether he succeeded or failed at the interview, he would approach it the way Constance had approached everything, with patience, with care, with the understanding that good things took time to build properly. 2 days before the interview, Finn asked if he could stay late and help with a project. They were working on a custom bracket for the hardware store when the young man asked, "You nervous about Friday?" "Yes." "Why?" "You're the best mechanic I've ever seen." Roy smiled at the simple confidence. "Being a good mechanic and being a good teacher are different things." "Not really. You've been teaching me for 2 years. You make complicated stuff make sense. You show me why things work, not just how." Finn tightened a bolt, checked his work. "My uncle says teaching is just caring enough to explain things properly. You do that." "Your uncle is wise." He also said something else. Said the people who are scared they're not good enough are usually the ones who are actually great. It's the people who think they're already perfect who mess things up. Roy considered this, filing it away with the other small wisdoms that had accumulated over the past weeks. Fear meant investment. Doubt meant caring about outcomes. Maybe his anxiety wasn't a sign of inadequacy, but of taking the opportunity seriously. They finished the bracket as evening settled in. After Finn left, Roy stood in his garage and looked at the industrial compressor Malcolm had sent. It dominated the space, a monument to possibility and risk. He walked over to it, ran his hand along the metal housing, felt the quality of the construction. This machine represented more than equipment. It represented Malcolm's belief in him. Judith's willingness to advocate for him, his own stubborn hope that it wasn't too late to become something more than what he'd settled for. Roy pulled out his phone and called Malcolm. The man answered on the third ring. "Roy, good to hear from you. Interview coming up, right? Friday." "I wanted to—" Roy paused, unsure how to express what he felt. "I wanted to thank you for the compressor, for the recommendation, for believing I was worth the effort. You fixed my generator for $60 and a promise. Trust goes both ways." Malcolm's voice warmed. "You ready for this?" "I don't know. I'm as prepared as I can be, but there's a panel member who apparently doesn't think I'm right for the position." "Quentin Vale? You know him?" "Worked with him for years. He's tough, but fair. Doesn't care about credentials or age. He cares about competence and passion. Show him you know your craft and why it matters, and he'll come around." "What if I can't? What if I get there and freeze up or prove I'm exactly as outdated as everyone thinks?" Malcolm was quiet for a moment. "You remember when I brought that generator to you? You could have turned me away, could have told me it was too complicated or you were too busy, but you didn't. You saw a problem and you solved it, because that's what you do. That instinct doesn't disappear just because you're nervous." After they hung up, Roy felt marginally better. He spent the evening organizing his portfolio one final time, making sure every piece of work was properly documented and explained. The portfolio told a story not just of mechanical skill, but of a life spent solving problems, helping people, building things that lasted. When he finally went to bed, Roy lay awake thinking about the next day. Tomorrow he would drive to Cedar Rapids, walk into Hartfield Industrial, and face a panel of professionals who would judge whether he was still the engineer Judith remembered. Tomorrow he would find out if Preston was right about him being a foolish old man chasing lost dreams. Tomorrow he would discover if courage was enough when skill might have eroded. Roy touched the wedding ring he still wore, closed his eyes, and tried to sleep. But sleep was elusive, pushed away by anticipation and fear, and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to reclaim the life he'd set aside. In the darkness, he whispered to Constance's memory one more time, "Help me be brave enough. Help me remember who I used to be." The house offered no answer except silence and the ticking of the clock, marking time until morning. Roy woke before dawn on Friday, nerves already thrumming through his system. He showered, shaved carefully, and put on the only suit he owned, a dark blue number he'd bought for Constance's funeral 11 years ago. It still fit, though the shoulders felt tighter than he remembered. Or maybe that was just tension. Iris arrived at 7 to drive him to Cedar Rapids. She'd insisted, said he shouldn't make the 90-mile drive while nervous. When she saw him in the suit, her eyes filled with tears. "You look like you're going somewhere important," she said. "I am. Or I'm about to find out I'm not." The drive took 2 hours through farmland that gradually gave way to industrial parks and suburban sprawl. They talked about the wedding, about Greg, about anything except the interview. But as they pulled into Hartfield Industrial's parking lot, Iris reached over and squeezed his hand. "Mom would be proud of you," she said, "for trying, or for being foolish enough to try, for being brave enough to want more." Hartfield Industrial was housed in a modern building of glass and steel that made Roy feel immediately out of place. Inside, the lobby was all polished surfaces and contemporary design. A receptionist directed him to the third floor, training division. Iris said she'd wait in the coffee shop across the street. Roy took the elevator up, portfolio case gripped in hands that were slightly damp. When the doors opened, he stepped into a hallway lined with photographs of industrial equipment and training sessions. Young faces, modern technology, a world that had evolved considerably since he'd been part of it. The reception area had him wait on a leather chair that was more style than comfort. He watched employees move past younger people, confident people, people who belonged here. Roy felt every one of his 61 years. At precisely 10 o'clock, a woman emerged from the office suite. Roy stood and for a moment they simply looked at each other across 3 decades of separation. Judith Oakes had aged well, silver hair cut short and professional, sharp eyes behind modern frames, the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. She smiled, and Roy saw traces of the young engineer he'd known, brilliant and determined, and always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. "Roy, thank you for coming." She extended her hand, and the handshake was firm, professional. "The panel is ready for you." She led him down a corridor to a conference room where 2 men waited. The first was introduced as Philip Conway, Operations Director 50s, solid build, the practical air of someone who'd worked his way up through the ranks. The second was Quentin Vale, Head of Fabrication, and Roy understood immediately why Judith had warned him. Vale was younger, maybe 40, with the confident bearing of someone who'd excelled early and often. His handshake was perfunctory, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Mr. Benson," Vale said, taking his seat, "we've reviewed Malcolm Greer's recommendation, quite enthusiastic. But I'll be honest, I have concerns about bringing on someone who's been out of the engineering field for 3 decades. Roy set his portfolio on the table. "I understand your hesitation. Do you? Because from where I sit, you're a small-town mechanic, asking us to believe you can teach advanced fabrication to students who've grown up with technology you've probably never used." Judith interjected smoothly, "Perhaps we should let Mr. Benson present his portfolio before we make judgments." Roy opened the case, hands steadier than he'd expected. He'd organized the materials chronologically: military work first, then the brief period with Kessler Defense, then a gap, then 30 years of garage work. He talked them through each piece, explaining the engineering principles, the problem-solving approaches, the evolution of his thinking. Vale listened with folded arms, occasionally asking pointed questions designed to expose gaps in Roy's knowledge. Conway seemed more interested, making notes, asking about practical applications. Judith watched everything with an unreadable expression. When Roy reached his recent work, Vale's skepticism intensified. "This is basic repair work. Where's the innovation? Where's the advanced engineering?" "In every choice I made," Roy said quietly. "Engineering isn't just about designing new things. It's about understanding systems deeply enough to fix them when they fail. It's about seeing problems from first principles and finding elegant solutions with limited resources. That's maintenance, not engineering. It's applied engineering under real-world constraints, the kind your students will face every day once they leave your training facility." Vale's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting our curriculum is inadequate?" "I'm suggesting there's value in teaching both theory and practical wisdom. Your students can learn computer-aided design anywhere, but can they diagnose a system failure using just their eyes and hands? Can they improvise when the right parts aren't available? Can they explain complex concepts to someone who doesn't have their education?" The room went quiet. Roy realized he'd been more assertive than intended, but he was tired of defending himself for choices made out of love rather than ambition. Conway broke the silence. "Valid points. But Mr. Vale's concern remains. Can you work with modern tools and methods? Our curriculum includes software and equipment you've likely never touched." "I can learn," Roy said, "and I'd argue that teaching is less about tools and more about understanding. I may need training on your specific equipment, but the fundamentals haven't changed. Physics is physics. Material properties are material properties. Good teaching is about making those fundamentals accessible." Judith leaned forward. "Roy, let me ask you directly. Why do you want this position? You've built a life in Millbrook. Why uproot it now?" Roy met her eyes and decided on complete honesty. "Because I've been living half a life. I made choices. I don't regret caring for my wife, raising my daughter, but somewhere along the way, I stopped being an engineer and became just a mechanic. I stopped growing and started just surviving." This opportunity is a chance to remember who I was and become who I might still be. You're 61, Vale said. Even if you succeed here, you've got, what, 5 years of productive work? Maybe 10? Why should we invest in someone with such limited runway? Because Roy paused, then realized he needed to shift tactics. Can I ask you something, Mr. Vale? How did you get into this field? Vale looked surprised by the question. Engineering degree, apprenticeship with a manufacturing firm, worked my way up. Someone taught you. Someone took time to show you not just what to do, but why it mattered. Someone invested in you when you were young and uncertain. Roy held his gaze. I'm not asking you to invest in a long career. I'm asking you to invest in what I can pass on to your students in whatever time I have. Experience isn't about years remaining, it's about wisdom accumulated. Before Vale could respond, Judith's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned slightly, then showed it to Conway. Their expressions shifted in a way that made Roy's stomach sink. "Excuse us for a moment," Judith said, standing. "We need to make a quick call." The 3 panel members stepped out, leaving Roy alone in the conference room. Through the glass walls, he could see them in the hallway, phone pressed to someone's ear, expressions serious. Something was wrong. He could feel it. When they returned 5 minutes later, Judith's face was carefully neutral. "Roy, I need to ask you something. Have you had recent inspections or legal issues with your property?" Roy's blood went cold. "There was a county inspection last week. Minor issues, nothing serious." "Why?" "We just received a call from someone claiming to be concerned about safety violations at your garage." Anonymous. But they provided specific details about code violations and suggested we should reconsider your candidacy, given questions about your professional standards. Preston. It had to be Preston. "The inspection found nothing substantive," Roy said, trying to keep his voice level. "I can provide documentation from both the county inspector and a state inspector who observed the process. The complaints filed against my property were fabricated by someone attempting to force a property sale." Vale's expression hardened. "Family drama, Mr. Benson? That's what you're bringing to this opportunity?" "I'm bringing 30 years of competent work and a brother desperate enough to commit fraud. Those are separate issues." "Are they?" Vale stood. "Because from where I sit, you've got instability in your personal life, questionable property conditions, and you're asking us to trust you with our reputation and students. I'm sorry, but I don't see this working." "Quentin," Judith's voice carried warning, but Vale ignored her. "We need instructors who are solid, reliable, without complications. You're a nice story, Mr. Benson, but you're also a risk we can't afford to take." Roy felt the opportunity slipping away, felt Preston's sabotage achieving exactly what it intended. But then something shifted inside him, not resignation but anger. He'd come too far, worked too hard, and faced too much to let this end because his brother couldn't control his desperation. "You're right that I have complications," Roy said, voice steady and cold. "My brother is trying to steal my property. I'm financially stretched. I'm older than your typical candidate. But here's what else is true. I showed up today. I prepared. I brought evidence of my abilities. And when someone tried to sabotage me, I didn't quit. I documented the truth and came anyway." He stood, gathering his portfolio. "You want someone without complications? Good luck finding that. Everyone has problems. The question is whether they run from them or work through them. I've been working through mine for 30 years, while maintaining professional standards, raising a daughter alone, and serving my community. If that's not reliable, I don't know what is." Roy moved toward the door, then turned back. "Malcolm Greer thought I was worth recommending. Judith thought I was worth interviewing. Maybe you should trust their judgment instead of an anonymous phone call from someone with a clear agenda." He walked out, leaving the panel in surprised silence. His hands shook as he pressed the elevator button, adrenaline and disappointment warring in his chest. He'd blown it, let his anger get the better of him, proved Vale right about complications and instability. The elevator doors opened, and Judith stepped out, slightly breathless from hurrying after him. "Wait," she said, "don't leave yet." Judith gestured toward a small conference room across the hall. "Please, give me 5 minutes." Roy hesitated, then followed her. Inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, studying him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "That was quite an exit," she said. "I shouldn't have lost my temper, but I'm tired of defending choices I made for the right reasons." "I know, and for what it's worth, I believe you about the sabotage." Judith pulled out her phone, showed him the screen. The call came from a blocked number, but the details they provided were oddly specific. Too specific. "Someone who knows your property well. My brother Preston. He needs the money from selling my property to cover gambling debts. He's desperate. And desperate people do foolish things." Judith pocketed her phone. "Here's where we stand. Vale is against hiring you. He was skeptical before, and this confirmed his doubts. Conway is on the fence. I'm in favor, but I can't override 2 negative votes." Roy felt defeat settling in. "So it's over?" "Not necessarily. There's a possibility." Judith paused, measuring her words. "We could offer you a practical demonstration. Tomorrow you come in and actually teach. We provide you with 3 student volunteers and a fabrication project. You have 4 hours to design something, execute it, and demonstrate your teaching methodology. If you can prove you're as capable as I believe you are, even Vale will have to reconsider. And if I can't, then Vale was right and I was wrong." Judith's expression softened. "Roy, I'm sticking my neck out for you." "Malcolm stuck his neck out for you. Now you need to show us we weren't mistaken." Roy's mind raced. A practical demonstration under observation, with his entire future riding on 4 hours of performance. Every doubt he'd ever had about his abilities suddenly felt magnified. "There's something else you should know," Judith continued. "Malcolm didn't just recommend you randomly. You two served together, didn't you?" Roy's confusion must have shown on his face. "He was a private in your engineering unit. You were his lieutenant. There was a training accident, scaffolding collapse. You pulled him out, risked your career by not following protocol. He's carried that debt for 35 years, Roy. Tracked you over the decades, waited for an opportunity to repay it." Memory surfaced slowly, pieces assembling into a picture Roy hadn't thought about in decades. A young private, scared but competent, scaffolding giving way. Roy acting on instinct rather than proper procedure, because waiting for protocol would have meant watching someone die. He'd been reprimanded quietly, told he'd endangered himself unnecessarily. "The generator breakdown wasn't an accident," Roy said, understanding dawning. "Malcolm engineered it, wanted to see if you were still the same man if you'd help a stranger in need. When you fixed it for $60 and a promise, he knew." Judith smiled slightly. "He's been planning this for months. The compressor, the recommendation, all of it. He wanted to give you back what you lost when you saved his life." Roy sat heavily. "I don't remember him. There were dozens of men in that unit. He remembers you. That's what matters." Judith's voice gentled. "The point is, people believe in you, Roy. Malcolm does. I do. The question is whether you believe in yourself enough to take this chance." "What time tomorrow?" 8 in the morning. Bring your tools if you have favorites. We'll provide everything else." After Judith left, Roy sat in the empty conference room and tried to process everything. Malcolm had orchestrated this entire situation, had been watching him for years, had created an opportunity specifically designed to give Roy his life back. The weight of that debt, that faith, felt overwhelming. His phone buzzed. Iris, texting from the coffee shop. "How did it go?" Roy called her instead of texting back. "Not great, but there's a second chance. I have to come back tomorrow and actually teach, show them what I can do." "That's good, right?" It's terrifying. What if I freeze up? What if I can't connect with the students? What if Vale was right, and I'm just an old man pretending he's more than he is? Dad, Iris's voice was firm, you've been teaching me my entire life. You've been teaching Finn for 2 years. You don't freeze up when something needs explaining, you light up. I've watched you do it 1,000 times. That's different. That's one person, people I know. Then treat tomorrow like teaching 3 people you're about to know. Just be yourself. She paused. You want me to stay tonight? We could get a hotel, prepare together. No. Go home to Greg. You've already given up enough time for me. I'm not giving up anything. I'm choosing to be here for you. They talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. Roy sat with his phone, staring at the blank screen, then dialed another number. Malcolm answered on the second ring. How'd it go? You've been planning this for a long time, Roy said. The generator, the recommendation, all of it. Silence, then a soft laugh. Judith told you. Why didn't you just say who you were? Would you have believed me if I had? Would you have accepted help if you knew it was repayment for something you probably didn't even remember? Malcolm's voice carried decades of gratitude. You saved my life, Roy. Not just that day on the scaffolding, but who I became after. Watching how you handled that situation calm under pressure, making the right call regardless of rules that shaped how I approached problems for my entire career. Roy's throat tightened. I was just doing what needed doing. Exactly. That's who you are, and that's who they need teaching their students. Malcolm paused. Tomorrow, when you're in front of those kids, just do what needs doing. You'll know what that is. After they hung up, Roy sat in his truck in Hartfield's parking lot and allowed himself to feel the full weight of everything. The opportunity, the sabotage, the revelation about Malcolm, the second chance. It was too much, all of it pressing down on him like gravity had suddenly intensified. He drove back to Millbrook alone, 2 hours through darkening farmland, with only his thoughts for company. By the time he pulled into his driveway, exhaustion had settled into his bones, but there was work to do. Roy spent the evening in his garage, planning tomorrow's demonstration. What project would showcase both technical skill and teaching ability? What would prove to Vale that age and experience were assets rather than liabilities? He sketched designs, rejected them, sketched more. Finally, around midnight, he settled on something, a complex bracket assembly that required precision welding, problem-solving, and adaptability. Simple enough to execute in 4 hours, sophisticated enough to demonstrate mastery. As he prepared his tools, carefully selecting each piece he'd need, Preston's car pulled into the lot. Roy watched his brother get out, weaving slightly, drunk or close to it. "Heard you had your interview today," Preston said, words slightly slurred. "How'd that go?" Roy set down the wrench he'd been inspecting. "You called them, tried to sabotage me with lies about the property." Preston's expression shifted, guilt and defiance mixing. "I was trying to make you see reality. You can't do this, Roy. You're going to fail and make everything worse. Get off my property. This is my property too. Dad left it to both of us. Dad left it to me. We both know that." The will was clear. Roy's voice stayed level despite anger simmering underneath. "You forged documents. You filed false reports. You tried to destroy this opportunity because you need money. Well, here's the truth, Preston. I'm not selling. Not now, not ever. You want money for your debts. You figure it out without stealing from me." Preston stumbled forward. "You think you're so much better than me. St. Roy, helping people, being noble, but you're just scared. Scared to admit you wasted your life on a dying woman and a garage that's falling apart." Roy moved before he could think, grabbing Preston's shirt and shoving him back against the car. "Don't you ever talk about Constance that way. She was worth more than every choice I've made combined." They stood there, brothers frozen in anger and pain, breathing hard. Then Roy released Preston and stepped back. "You need help?" Roy said quietly. Real help, not money. You need to deal with your gambling, your drinking, your resentment. And until you do, stay away from me. Preston slid down the car to sit on the ground, and for a moment he looked like a lost child rather than a grown man. I've ruined everything, haven't I? Pretty much. What do I do? Roy wanted to stay angry, wanted to hold on to righteous fury, but looking at his brother broken and desperate and drowning in consequences of his own making, he felt pity instead. Tomorrow I have a second chance at this interview. Practical demonstration. If I succeed, when I succeed, I'll help you. Not by selling my property, but by helping you get into treatment, helping you rebuild. But Preston, you have to want to be helped. You have to stop blaming everyone else and start taking responsibility. And if you fail tomorrow, then we're both in trouble, and we'll figure it out together. Because that's what family does, even when they don't deserve it. Preston nodded slowly, then pulled himself up using the car. I'm sorry, Roy, for all of it. I know. Now go home, sleep it off, and think about whether you're ready to actually change or just sorry you got caught. After Preston left, Roy returned to his preparation. But his hands were shaking now, adrenaline and emotion making fine motor control difficult. He sat on his workbench, head in hands, and tried to center himself. Tomorrow he would face 3 students, a skeptical panel, and his own doubts about whether he was still capable of being more than a small-town mechanic. Tomorrow would determine if Malcolm's faith was justified, if Judith's advocacy was wise, if his own hope was delusional. Tomorrow he would find out who Roy Benson really was, stripped of excuses and history and comfortable routines. Roy looked at his tools, arranged carefully on the bench. Each one had a history, had solved countless problems, had built and repaired and created. They were extensions of his hands, and his hands had never forgotten how to work. Tomorrow, he said aloud to the empty garage, to himself, to whatever was listening, tomorrow I show them. He locked up and walked to his house under a sky full of stars. Inside, he set his alarm for 5 in the morning and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep would be elusive, but needing to try anyway. Tomorrow everything changed. One way or another, tomorrow would answer the question he'd been asking himself for 11 years. Was there still something more to Roy Benson than survival? He closed his eyes and tried to believe the answer was yes. Kenneth, Harold said, surprise flooding through him. You came. I came. Kenneth stepped inside, stopped when he saw the crowded living room. His eyes landed on Samuel, and for a moment nobody spoke. Samuel stood slowly, setting aside the letters. You must be Kenneth. And you must be the brother I didn't know existed. Kenneth's voice was carefully controlled. Samuel, right? Sam. Most people call me Sam. They stood there, sizing each other up. Kenneth was older by 11 years, polished and professional. Samuel was younger, more relaxed, wearing jeans and a sailboat t-shirt. But they shared the same jawline, the same way of standing. The resemblance to Harold was unmistakable in both. I wasn't going to come, Kenneth admitted. I was halfway back to Portland when I turned around. What changed your mind? Pauline asked. Kenneth looked at his father. You left me a voicemail. You said you were meeting your son for the first time and wished all your children could be there. His voice cracked. I realized I was letting anger make me miss something important. He turned to Samuel. I don't know you. I don't know if I'm ready to. But you're here, and your family, and I'm tired of running away from things that scare me. Samuel extended his hand. Then, let's start with hello. Kenneth shook it, then surprised everyone by pulling Samuel into a brief hug. Hello, little brother. I'm 6'2", Samuel said with a slight smile. Not that little. I'm 6'3". I win. Kenneth stepped back, saw Zoe and Anne for the first time. And this is? My wife, Zoe, my daughter, Anne. Kenneth's expression softened, looking at the sleeping child. I have a daughter too, Chloe. She's 16. "I'd like to meet her," Samuel said. "Yeah, I'd like that." Kenneth moved further into the room, nodded stiffly at Claire. "Mother." "Kenneth," Claire's voice was barely a whisper, "don't thank me yet. I'm still angry. I know. I don't forgive you. I know. But I'm here." Kenneth sat on the couch. "I'm here and I'm trying, and that's all I've got right now." Harold felt something tight in his chest loosen. All four of his children, in one room. For the first time in their lives, all four together. They talked late into the night. Kenneth asked Samuel questions about his life, his family, what he wanted from this reunion. Samuel answered honestly, not trying to be anything other than what. He was a man curious about his origins, but secure in the life he'd built. "I'm not here to claim anything," Samuel said. "I'm not after money or inheritance or some father-son relationship that replaces the one I have. I just wanted to know where I came from." "And now you know," Kenneth said. "Now I know." Samuel looked around at all of them, and it's strange and complicated and maybe a little bit wonderful. Pauline had been sketching during the conversation, quick drawings of Samuel's face, of Anne sleeping, of the family gathered together. She showed them to Samuel, who studied them with interest. "You're really talented," he said. "Thank you," Pauline blushed. "I don't usually show people my work." "Why not?" She shrugged. "Fear, I guess, of rejection, of not being good enough." "These are good enough," Samuel said firmly. "More than good enough." Coming from a stranger, a brother, the words seemed to land differently. Pauline smiled, really smiled, for the first time in days. Claire excused herself around 11, exhausted. Harold helped her upstairs, made sure she had her medication. "They're all here," she said wonderingly. "All four of them. They are. I never thought I'd see this." "Rest now," Harold said gently. "They'll still be here tomorrow." When he came back downstairs, Gregory was showing Samuel photos on his phone, pictures of Seattle, of his apartment, of the life he'd built. "You ever think about moving back?" Samuel asked. "Sometimes," Gregory admitted. "More now than before." "Because of her." Samuel gestured upstairs. "Because of all of this. Because I'm tired of running away." Gregory glanced at his siblings. "We spent 30 years being broken. Maybe it's time to try being fixed." "Can you fix something this broken?" Kenneth asked. "I don't know," Gregory said, "but we can try." Later, after Zoe had taken Anne to the guest room and the others had gone, Pauline to her apartment, Kenneth to a hotel, Harold and Samuel sat on the back porch. The harbour was dark, only a few lights visible across the water. "Thank you for coming," Harold said, "for giving us this chance." "Thank you for wanting me," Samuel replied, "even though you didn't know I existed." "I have a question," Harold said, "and you don't have to answer." "Ask." "What do you want from this? From us? Long term, I mean, after your mother is gone?" Samuel was quiet for a long time, watching the dark water. "I don't know," he said finally. "I have parents. I have a life. But there's something about knowing where you came from, who gave you your hands, your height, your love of sailing. It matters. It does. So maybe we stay in touch. Email, phone calls. Maybe Anne grows up knowing she has a grandfather and uncles and an aunt. Maybe it's not perfect or traditional, but it's something." Samuel looked at Harold. "Would that be enough for you?" "More than enough," Harold said. "Whatever you're willing to give, it's more than I had yesterday." They sat in comfortable silence, father and son, connected by blood and 31 years of absence, finding their way toward something that might, someday, feel like family. Inside, the house was full of people who belonged to him. 4 children, 1 daughter-in-law, 1 granddaughter, and somewhere upstairs, dying slowly, the woman who'd given him all of it. Harold looked at Samuel and thought about Walter, about the boat, about how sometimes the things that break us are also the things that bring us together. "Your grandfather was right," he said. "About what?" "The boat. Leaving it to us. forcing us to deal with each other. Harold smiled. He knew we needed something to fix, something to build together. Did it work? Harold looked at his son, this man he'd just met, who already felt essential, and said, "Yeah, I think maybe it did." The next morning, Harold woke to find Claire in the kitchen, weaker but determined. She was making coffee with shaking hands. "You should be resting," he said. "I've been resting for 30 years. She poured 2 cups. "I want to spend what time I have left being awake." Samuel and his family stayed through the weekend. They spent Saturday at the boathouse, working on the Mercy together. Samuel proved skilled with boats, his hands confident with the repairs. He and Harold worked side by side on the engine, while Kenneth and Gregory tackled the deck boards. Pauline kept Anne entertained, the little girl calling her Lala, because she couldn't pronounce Pauline. Zoe helped Claire organize Walter's old charts, the 2 women talking quietly about family and forgiveness. By Sunday afternoon, the boat looked better than it had in years. Fresh paint gleamed on the hull. The deck was solid. The engine turned over smoothly. They stood back, all 6 of them, looking at what they'd built together. "Grandpa Walter would be proud," Gregory said softly. "He would," Harold agreed. That evening, before Samuel had to drive back to Louisiana, they gathered one more time at Harold's house. Claire had something for Samuel, a small wooden box Harold had never seen before. "I made this," she said, trembling as she opened it. Inside was a tiny boat, carved from wood, no bigger than Samuel's palm. "I made it the week you were born. Before I had to give you up, I wanted you to have something from me." Samuel took the little boat carefully, studying the clumsy carving. It was rough, unfinished, made by unpracticed hands. "It's not very good," Claire said, embarrassed. "It's perfect," Samuel said firmly. "Thank you." He showed it to Anne, who reached for it with curious fingers. "Boat, baby. Grandma made this boat for Daddy." Anne touched it gently, sensing its importance. Kenneth cleared his throat. "I have something too. For all of you." He pulled out his phone, showed them a document. "I talked to my lawyer yesterday. Had him draw up papers to officially split the boat 5 ways. Dad, you keep the controlling interest, but the rest of us, all 4 of us, we're equal partners." "Kenneth," Harold started, but his son held up a hand. "I was wrong. About selling it, about thinking everything has to have a dollar value." Kenneth looked at the boat visible through the window. "This matters. Family matters, and I'm tired of pretending it doesn't." Pauline hugged him fiercely. Gregory clasped his shoulder. Samuel nodded his thanks. "There's one condition," Kenneth added. "We finish the restoration. All of us. Together. However long it takes." "Deal," Pauline said immediately. "I'm in Seattle," Gregory pointed out. "So visit more often," Kenneth said. "We'll work around your schedule." Gregory smiled. "Okay. I'll visit more often." They all looked at Samuel, who lived furthest away. "I can come up once a month," Samuel offered. "Maybe more in the summer when school's out. Anne would love it, and Zoe's been wanting to see more of the country." "Then it's settled," Harold said. "We restore the Mercy together." Claire watched them with tears streaming down her face. "This is what I wanted, what I came back for. To see you together, to see you choosing each other." "We're choosing you too," Pauline said softly, taking her mother's hand. "I'm still angry, I'm still hurt, but I'm choosing to try, to understand, to forgive eventually." Kenneth was slower, but he nodded. "I don't know if I can get there, to forgiveness, but I can be here, I can show up. That's something. It's everything," Claire said. Gregory knelt beside her chair. "I blamed myself for 35 years. I thought you left because of me, because I was too much, too difficult, too broken." "Never," Claire said fiercely, cupping his face. "You were wanted, you were loved. I left because I was broken, not you, never you." Gregory cried then, the tears of a child who'd finally heard the words he needed. Claire held him, this youngest son she'd abandoned, and they grieved together for all the lost years. Samuel stood apart, watching this family that was his but wasn't, connected by blood but separated by time. Harold went to him, put a hand on his shoulder. "You're part of this," Harold said. "However much or little you want to be, you're part of this family." "I know," Samuel said. "I feel it. It's strange, but I feel it." Samuel had to leave before dark for the long drive home. They all walked him to his car, hugging goodbye, promising to stay in touch. Anne waved from her car seat, calling "Bye-bye, Papa" to Harold, making everyone smile through their tears. Harold watched the tail lights disappear, then turned to find his 3 other children still standing in the driveway: Kenneth, Pauline, Gregory. The ones he'd raised, the ones who'd lived through everything together. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here, for trying, for giving your mother and me this chance." "We're not doing it for you," Kenneth said, but his tone was gentle. "We're doing it for us, because we're tired of being broken." "Then I'm grateful anyway," Harold replied. Kenneth left next, then Gregory. Pauline lingered, helping Harold clean up the kitchen. "Dad," she said as she was leaving, "I think we're going to be okay, all of us." "Eventually, I think so too, sweetheart." After she left, Harold sat with Claire in the quiet house. She looked exhausted, the day having taken everything she had. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me do this, for letting me see them one more time, for giving Samuel the chance to know his family." "You gave us that chance," Harold corrected. "You came back. That took courage. Or desperation, maybe both." They sat in silence. 2 people who'd loved each other once, who'd built a life and lost it, who were finding their way towards something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but might be peace. "Harold," Claire's voice was small, "will you stay with me when it gets bad? I don't want to die alone." He took her hand. This woman who'd broken his heart and given him everything worth having. "You won't be alone," he promised. "I'll be here." And he meant it. Claire died on a Tuesday morning in late October, 6 weeks after Samuel's first visit. She passed quietly in the guest room, Harold holding her hand, all 4 children gathered around the bed. It was peaceful, as much as death ever is. She'd said her goodbyes the night before, told each of them she loved them, that she was proud of who they'd become. At the end, she looked at Harold and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on them." Then she closed her eyes and didn't open them again. They held the funeral at the harbour, a small gathering of people who'd known Claire in the brief time she'd been back. Clifford came. Irene came. Samuel brought his family. Kenneth brought Chloe, who cried even though she'd never known her grandmother. They scattered Claire's ashes from the Mersey, all of them aboard together. Harold stood at the helm, his 4 children around him, and released his wife into the water she'd loved when she was young. "Goodbye, Claire," he said softly. The wind carried her away. 3 months later, on a cold January morning, Harold stood at the boathouse, watching his children work. The Mersey was nearly finished. Months of weekends spent sanding and painting, repairing and rebuilding. Samuel came up once a month as promised. Kenneth drove down from Portland every other weekend. Gregory had started looking at jobs in Maine, talking about moving back. Pauline was there almost daily, documenting the restoration in sketches. Today, they were installing the final piece, a new compass for the helm. Samuel had commissioned it, had it engraved. The Brennan family, 2024. Harold held it carefully, remembering the compass his father had treasured. "Ready, Dad?" Samuel asked, standing beside him. Harold nodded. Together, they mounted the compass in its place, secured it firmly. It gleamed in the winter light, new and bright and hopeful. "It's beautiful," Pauline said, taking a photo. "Grandpa Walter would love it," Gregory added. Kenneth ran his hand over the brass casing. "A new direction for all of us." They stood there, the 5 of them, looking at what they'd built. The boat was transformed still, the Mersey, still carrying the history of 2 generations, but renewed, made whole again through patient work and stubborn love. "Should we take her out?" Samuel suggested. In January? Kenneth raised an eyebrow. It's freezing. So? We're New Englanders. Mostly. Samuel grinned. Come on. First voyage of the New Mercy. All of us together. Harold looked at his children, these four people who'd found their way back to each other through grief and truth, and a boat that had refused to let them stay broken. Let's do it, he said. They cast off, Harold at the helm with Samuel beside him. Learning the controls, Kenneth and Gregory worked the lines. Pauline sat on the bow, sketchbook in hand, capturing the moment. The harbour was quiet, cold, beautiful. The Mercy moved through the water smoothly, all the repairs holding, the engine purring. Harold felt something settle in his chest, not quite peace, but close. Contentment, maybe. Gratitude. He thought about Claire, about the broken woman who'd come back to give them all one last gift. He thought about Walter, who'd orchestrated this reunion from beyond the grave. He thought about 30 years of single parenting, of loneliness and determination, of wondering if he was doing anything right. Looking at his children now, all four of them, he thought maybe he had. "Dad?" Pauline called from the bow. "You okay?" "I'm good, sweetheart," he called back. "I'm really good." Samuel took the helm fully, Harold stepping back to let him. His son guided the boat with confident hands. Kenneth and Gregory joined Harold on the deck. "Mum would have loved this," Kenneth said quietly. "Seeing us all together." "She did see it," Gregory reminded him. "Those last weeks, she saw it." "I'm glad," Kenneth said. "I'm glad we gave her that." They sailed for an hour, talking and laughing, sharing stories. Kenneth told them about Chloe's acceptance to college. Gregory announced he'd accepted a job in Portland, would be moving back in the spring. Pauline revealed she'd signed up for a gallery showing, was finally ready to share her work. Samuel talked about Anne, about teaching, about how much Zoe loved visiting Maine. "We're thinking about getting a summer place up here," he said. "Nothing fancy, just somewhere to bring Anne. Let her know her family." Harold's heart swelled. Family. They were becoming a family. As they headed back to the harbour, Harold stood at the stern, watching the wake spread behind them. He thought about the journey, not just this sail, but the whole long path that had brought them here. From Claire's leaving to her return, from Walter's death to Samuel's arrival, from four broken individuals to something that resembled a whole. The boat had done what Walter knew it would, brought them together, given them something to build. Not just wood and steel, but trust, connection, love. Samuel guided the Mercy into her slip perfectly. Kenneth and Gregory securing the lines. They climbed out, stood on the dock looking at their work. "Same time next month?" Samuel asked. "Same time next month," Harold confirmed. They dispersed slowly, Kenneth to his car, Gregory to meet a friend, Pauline to her studio. Samuel lingered, helping Harold lock up. "Thank you," Samuel said, "for this, all of this." "Thank you for coming," Harold replied, "for giving an old man the chance to know his son." They hugged, the gesture easier now after months of practice. Harold watched Samuel drive away, then turned back to the harbour. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and orange. The Mercy sat in her slip, waiting for the next voyage. He thought about Claire's last words, about not giving up. He thought about his children, scattered but connected now, building something new from the pieces of what had broken. And standing there in the cold January evening, Harold Brennan smiled. Some losses never heal, they just become part of who you are. But sometimes, if you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to face the pain, you can build something new. Not what you had before. Something different. Something honest. Something worth keeping. The boat rocked gently, and Harold headed home.